Howdy y'all. Welcome back to Mage the Podcast.
Alright, so today's episode didn't start with Magick. It started with microphones not working, Zoom gremlins, and two grown adults muttering, "Can you hear me now?" like a seance gone sideways. But once the tech gods relented, we got gold. Our guest is none other than Gary Lachman, founding bassist of Blondie, turned one of the most respected historians of the occult alive today. He's written about Crowley, Blavatsky, Gurdjieff, meme magic, Tulpa theory, and how the 21st century might be the most magical and terrifying era in modern history. And he's here to talk with us about magic, synchronicity, pop culture, and how all of this collides with role-playing games like Mage the Ascension. What is magic, really? And why does reality feel so elastic these days? What do David Bowie, the astral plane, and CBGB in 1975 have in common? You're about to find out. So, brew some coffee, light a candle, burn some incense, and maybe, just maybe, don't open that portal unless you know how to close it. Let's begin.
Howdy, Gary. Today we're diving into the wonderful world of magic. What is magic? Where does magic culture stand these days? And how can we breathe life into magic, into role-playing games like Mage the Ascension? But before we jump in, what I wanted to do was start at the beginning. So if you could tell me briefly, what was your introduction to magic and the occult? And when did you realize that magic was something that you could tap into?
Well, I first got interested in magic and the occult, which I subsequently have made something a career writing about many years later, when I was a musician. And this is, well nigh 50 years ago now, in 1975, when I was living on the Bowery in New York. When it was the Bowery, it isn't anymore. It's just ridiculously, everything's incredibly changed and overpriced there. But with Debbie, Harry, and Chris Stein, and the club CBGB, where, you know, the Ramones and television, and Patti Smith and everybody else came out of, it was just up the road a bit. And there was a fellow living in the place, or rented us the floor. It was a loft. There was like 3 floors, and he rented us one. And he was really into Aleister Crowley. He was a flamboyant gay biker artist fellow who used to do these impromptu tarot card readings with the old Crowley, the Crowley Thoth tarot deck, which at the time was fairly rare. And so I got interested in that way, and I read Diary of a Drug Fiend. But the book that really, really changed my life, I mean, literally, and got me, as I said, in the sense of making a career later on, writing about this sort of thing, was a book called The Occult by a British writer named Colin Wilson. It had to come out in 1971. Wilson had made his name a decade and a half earlier with his first book called The Outsider, which was kind of a book about existentialism and extreme mental states and things like that. And but he had got interested in the occult, and he'd written this book, and it was a fantastic page turner. I was just compulsively readable, as the book reviewer cliche goes, but also all about fantastic things like, different states of consciousness and incredible, people like Madame Blavatsky and Crowley and Gurdjieff and many others like that. So I was about 19, and I just got very, bowled over by it, and just gradually over, as I said, many years, it went from kind of immediate, naive, enthusiastic interest in this stuff to learning about its actual history in Western culture and to Western civilization. Actually, you can go back to the very beginning.
This sort of sounds like a path you went down, that it was sort of a scholarly interest, but when did it become something experiential for you?
Again, that's my life later on after that, but a couple years after I first became interested in this sort of stuff, I moved to Los Angeles, and had left Blondie, and I went to LA, start my own band. And I've been reading lots of Crowley at this point, and other things, books about the Golden Dawn and a variety of other things, and had some interesting experiences, shared dreams and telepathic experiences, things of that sort. I actually wrote a song called "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear," which was a big hit for Blondie. One of the early hits was about these shared dream experiences I always had with my girlfriend at the time. So I was having kind of, experiences in the world that is part of the world I was reading. And then I When I was in LA around 1978, I got involved with, the OTO, actually, the Ordo Templi Orientis, which again I subsequently came to understand had kind of was had a revival in sort of the early 70s. It had died out sort of after Crowley's death in a variety of different kind of incarnations, at least in the sort of California, the area I was in. But there used to be, I don't think it's not there anymore, but there used to be an old bookshop in Hollywood Boulevard called Gilbert's, that had sold a lot of occult books. It wasn't solely an occult bookshop, but it had a large stock of that. And people like Kenneth Anger, the filmmaker, the Korean filmmaker, friends of Mick Jagger and Jimmy Page, and people like Jimmy Page and David Bowie and other kind of rock star folk who were interested in the occult had used to go to the shop and get stuff and all that. So long before the internet and anything like that, social media, there was a bulletin board. I don't know if anybody remembers those. In the bookshop, and there was a little notice about a kind of Crowley group. So I was somebody, if I get interested in something, I tend to, okay, let's see what it's about. I sort of check it out and then say, well, let's check it out and see what happens. And so I got in touch with them and then wound up getting involved. But it was so I wound up practicing, quite a bit of the rituals in Crowley's magic and theory and practice and things of that sort. But it soon became something that I wasn't that the sort of Crowley side of it. I at least in this context that I had found myself in, it soon sort of got very claustrophobic, and I outgrew it fairly quickly. But from that kind of early hands-on kind of practice that I did do, I devoted myself more and more generally towards kind of consciousness itself. So, because that's the ultimate aim of magic, as far as I understand. Even Crowley would say, he would say, magic is the science of art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. And then Dion Fortune added changes in consciousness, conformity with will. But that kind of, that became, so I went from checking out and doing rituals and things like that and practicing a variety of different kind of, tarot and geomancy, and variety of different things, to focusing more on actually kind of studying consciousness itself.
If you don't mind me asking, because Crowley seems to be the interway for a lot of people, although that might have changed over the last couple of decades, what did you find claustrophobic about it?
So all roads lead to Crowley. I mean, just like somebody who's in the news a lot these days. I won't mention any name. Everything leads back to Crowley himself. So, for somebody who had a remarkable life, it had no effect on him, which is one of the. I wound up writing a book about Crowley. Many years later, I wrote a book about him, and one of the things I came to see is that he had enough adventures to fill dozens of ordinary people's lives, but throughout them he never changes. He's the same person at the beginning of the story as he is at the end. Most of us go through psychological, emotional, maturation sort of events that alter us in some ways, but no, he remains sort of the naughty schoolboy, trying to give the establishment two fingers, and sociopath and project. I mean, he was brilliant in many ways. That's what makes him interesting. He's brilliant, and he's very good when he's talking about himself. So, the Confessions of Aleister Crowley is one of his more readable sorts of books, and and he had a very good sense of humor and all that. But so there's all these good points that, at least when I first became aware of him, I was drawn, to these sorts of things. But then gradually, over a while, it's like, well, it's all about him. And again, no matter how much magic and altered states and meditative kind of experiences he mastered, he was not a particularly good human being. So that was like one of the things that I sort of discovered. And people that were very much into him, at least in this group that I was part of, for a while, not for very long, but a year at the most, not even that probably. They seem to kind of echo or resemble in some ways these less salubrious characteristics of the great beast.
Well, like attracts like, as they say. So I'm curious though. So you're in Blondie for a while, and being in that group and being part of pop culture, you get to rub shoulders with a lot of interesting people. So I imagine, and maybe I'm mistaken, but that might have introduced you to a lot of interesting people and presented a lot of interesting opportunities. But my question is, did it ever become a hindrance? Did it close some doors for you?
Oh, the occult stuff.
Yes.
Oh well, my classic story is what I call the Colin Wilson David Bowie story, and this happened probably about 1981 ish, around there, and I had while in Blondie, our first North American tour, we were the opening act for Iggy Pop, and this was Iggy Pop's revival. This is 1977, so it's a while ago. But this was Iggy Pop his career had gone down a bit, and he was being revived, and Bowie was behind resuscitating him. He actually, on this tour, Bowie was playing keyboards in Iggy's band, but he wasn't announced, so it was sort of incognito. But it had got through the grapevine. Again, before social media, internet, anything like that, people used to be able to transmit news in other ways. You think it was impossible, but they did. But in any case, so there was that tour, and again, he never knew me in any way whatsoever, but I knew, obviously who he was and all that. And then, but what happened was I got invited to his loft. He had a loft in Midtown Manhattan, because at least that's where I remember it was. And he was there, and he had been talking apparently about the occult. This was a period he was very interested in. He was interested in books like The Spear of Destiny, which is one of these occult Nazi books that Hitler was in pursuit of dark magic and so on and so on. And there was a sudden lull in the conversation, and a friend of mine who was there said, "Oh, well, Gary knows all about the occult because he reads Colin Wilson." And this was this British writer who wrote this book, The Occult, and he wrote Others, Mysteries, and he wrote quite a bit about a variety of different like poltergeists and things like that. And he wrote a book about Crowley, and he wrote many books. And so, in any case, at the mention of the writer's name, Colin Wilson, Bowie does, Colin Wilson, oh yes, he heads a coven in Cornwall, and he draws pentagrams on his neighbors' doors. And I hadn't met Wilson yet. I mean, I would meet him in 1983. Actually, went on a part of what I call the mini search for the miraculous with a friend and myself. We're in Europe, going to different kind of sacred sites. And on a solo leg of that journey, I made a pilgrimage to the far west, Cornwall, the far west country, here in England, where Wilson lived until he died in 2013. And that was actually the beginning of a friendship between us. But I had read a lot of his books, and I said, well, actually, he doesn't. He writes about this stuff, but he's not a magician or a witch or anything like that. And I said, David, I don't know if that's really true. Oh yes, I know for a fact that he draws down the astral shells of Nazis and all this weird stuff. I'm not the kind of person to sort of say, well, I should just say, oh really? Oh, actually, no, that's not really true, Dave. That's really true. And I suddenly realized it had gone quiet because I was telling the emperor that he didn't have clothes on or something like that. And at the time, Bowie had these two large female bodyguards, and I forget which Bond film it is. I think it's one of the last ones with Sean Connery, but there's these two like female assassins, Thumper and Bambi, I think they're called, and they're like doing all these somersaults around him and kicking him, and that was like that. And they came up to me and they said, David's tired, but we think you should leave. And they walked me out of the place. So this was a time when my knowledge of at least one sort of occult area led to a sort of social ostracizing me. But I subsequently just learned or realized what Bowie had done. He had actually mixed up something that Wilson had written about someone in Cornwall a story about a sort of local witch who went around and putting pentagrams and but in any case, so I thought it's I guess yeah, he was reading that. That's what. But in any case, so there you go. So, but oh, actually, I mean, I was when I was in music and doing it, there wasn't anybody else really around me really into it. It wasn't like I mean, Chris and Debbie, they had a kitschy kind of fun interest in it, as far as I could tell. But I mean, once I started, getting into it, it was, I'm pretty obsessive. So I just, I started reading lots of stuff. And it was a good time in the mid 70s because there was kind of a revival of that going on. And there was a lot of cheap paperbacks out about everything, So, yeah, it was a good time to be into it.
That leads me to another question I had. It seems like the interest in magic ebbs and flows in culture and waxes and wanes. What do you think was happening in the 70s that was causing this revival? And what do you think is the state of magical culture in the 21st century as of today?
Well, today, I think today it's smack in the middle now. That's but that's we live in this strange time, and all the stuff that was on the fringe is now center stage. And I say the individual I was alluding to earlier is
we know who he is,
the centrifugal force. And I've written a book. I did a book about this. I did a book about Trump's first election, and it's called Dark Star Rising: Magic and Power in the Age of Trump. And one of the things that never comes out, at least I don't see it, or maybe you see it. Probably, I have seen it actually in more recent times and more mainstream kind of write-ups about this, is the fact that he was brought up on the power of positive thinking, which is a form of mental science, new thought. Thoughts are things. It's a form of just focusing intensely, fanatically, absolutely single-mindedly on your goal, and to the exclusion of everything else, and it will manifest. And then, at least at the first time around, I mean, do you remember the alt-right? I don't know, they were very fashionable, but now forgotten. And there was all the stuff about them being able to somehow use the internet memes and meme magic, and Pepe the Frog, who I can't possibly go into trying to explain if you don't know who he is. But he was this, slacker amphibian cartoon, figure who got appropriated by the dark forces, and turned into a kind of magical talisman that people claimed was used to somehow help Trump get elected by somehow flooding the internet with all of these images. That it seeped over from the internet into reality, which at the time, actually, this is part of the main theme of the book, is that, well, everything was seeping over from the simulation into the real thing, or the real thing into the simulation. All right, because Trump himself starts out as a reality TV star, The Apprentice, where he's priming himself for the role that he's in now, or first took on and now coming back. He wore the suit, had the tie. He gave with one hand, he took away with the other. He was stern. He was generous, and he was the power guy in there. And he was on TV. Then he came out, and we live in a time where this is what's happening. The main thing I say in this book is that people suddenly realize that reality is malleable. The whole idea is some reality that's there it is. There's reality, and everything has to be judged according to reality. There's like, there's no such thing, mate. Academics were saying decades before, deconstructionists, postmodernists, things like that. There's no reality with capital R, no truth, capital T. It's all perspectival. It's all relative. Then reality TV. What's the most popular thing on television? Oh, reality. Whoa, hold on. You go to television to get reality? Yep, there you go. And lots of television came into reality. So all this stuff was happening at the same time. And meanwhile, Putin had been doing something like that, and is still doing it. He's been doing it since he's been in power. He's been doing it for 25 years. Trump is like trying to catch up to that. I mean, if everything goes according to plan, that's what's going to start happening in the U.S.
Great.
Well, but I'm saying, so. I mean, to me, it's actually. I feel that we've entered a magical realm now, and it's not what we wanted. everybody wanted something, because when his daughter was Ivana, or she at the that not this time around, but the last Republican convention, when he was first up, she said, now everything is possible. We all, whenever we hear everything is possible, we immediately think, oh wow, that's great, everything's possible. Well, hold on, everything is possible. So it's not only good things are possible, it's like lots of stuff that we really don't necessarily want to happen suddenly becomes possible. And then when you have the ruthless, unscrupulous, single-minded, fanatically monomania consciousness who grabs onto the idea that I create reality, then the idea that anything is possible becomes something that's dangerous. So I think actually the magical culture is like it's become the center stage, and it's not what people who were promoting a kind of magical culture earlier, myself among them, really had in mind. So that this is, and this is the strange thing. And I mentioned Russia because you probably know this fellow Alexander Dugin, who's still in the picture. He was in the picture before with the alt-right, and now he's still in the picture. And he's a chaos magician and a professional conspirologist, and he's Velcroed himself in and out of any number of weird, mashups of different totalitarian, fascistic kind of, political, systems. And he starts out as a 1980s anti-Soviet punk. And as far as I know, he's still lecturing on geopolitics to the Kremlin. So this is it's like all strange kind of things have entered. And I think this is what's flummoxed the West. I think this is what's flummoxed all of the mainstream progressive, whatever mainstream progressive, more rational. It's like they don't know what to make of this. And they also don't know what to make of the fact that for all his lies and scurrilous behavior, Trump is giving his followers a sense of meaning, which is a religious experience. And as long as that's going, it won't argue, it won't question. It's like, because it's being promoted by an emotional kind of charge, and that's what's doing it. So
I don't remember where I read this or heard this, but someone speculated that most people they're sitting by on events in reality. It used to be in the old days that they had an active stake in what the world was, and now we just watch a lot of TV and sit by passively. But through what Trump and QAnon has done is now they're shaping the universe, that they're actively involved. And once you have a stake in it, it's hard to shrug that off. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I've heard. So we touched upon this. What I thought we might do is spend a couple of minutes defining, at least for you, what is magic really?
These days, if somebody asks me what's my definition of magic, I say it's induced synchronicity. So if you know synchronicity, the psychologist C.G. Jung's term for meaningful coincidence, that's basically what it is. So, but he came up with a more scientific sounding term for it, and it's meaningful coincidence. So it's something you got in your mind, something that's important to you, something you're thinking about, and then out in the world is something that, in some way, unmistakably tells you that it's aware of what you're thinking of. And what's important to you, and somehow is giving you some kind of message about it in some way, which sounds like crazy think, right? Not, but you start to see, meaningful coincidences everywhere. But we all know what I mean when they hit you. It's like, oh wow, wow, and oh, that was just a coincidence. But Jung said no, they happen too often, and the difference between a coincidence and a meaningful coincidence is, by the definition, the meaningful one has the kind of peculiar meaning. It has a content to it, and they happen, but I would say, can you make them happen? And that, what's the conditions around them? And I would say magic is something along those kinds of lines. You can create, and this is what these, people who were saying that they were using the internet to, help Trump get elected, these disaffected youth, 4chan, addicts, supposedly living in their parents' basement, just like, banging out on these websites, all this weird stuff. And they were posting all this stuff, and it struck them that stuff they were posting seemed to be happening, a ripple effect out in the world. At the same time, they seemed to be getting some kind of response from the site itself. And I say, look, don't call up what you can't put down. There's lots of reasons why there's portals and they're closed and all that sort of thing. And if you start messing with the dimensional barriers or they get perforated, these things are waiting to come in. That this is Madame Blavatsky's, critique ages ago, or warning about the people interested in spiritualism, because it's not Aunt Betty and it's not Napoleon. And it's not whoever you might think it is talking to you. It's the equivalent of the astral hobos, the lowlifes who have nothing better to do than hang out on the low astral, and they just love to talk to you because they get, they live off that kind of stuff. So I would, there's is it really? Well, who knows? Why not? Do we really need to find out? And, I also, in the book, I said, the whole idea of a tulpa, which is a Tibetan, term for a thought form.
Right.
That takes on an actual physical exterior reality. And I mentioned the unfortunate, she talks about what she had somehow created one of a wolf, and that she had to absorb it back. And the great traveler and writer Alexander David Neal, who's one of the first women in Tibet. She actually talks about creating a kind of tulpa of a monk when she was staying in a monastery, and the monk got out of hand. And the head monk of the monastery had to say, "You have to bring the tulpa. He's eating all the rice. He's doing all this stuff. And she had to really concentrate and kind of reabsorb this thing." And so that's one kind of thought form, something that starts out in the imagination and manifests. And the other is something that's called the egregore, which is a Greek word, and it means watcher. But it's some kind of entity that grows out of a group. So something from the tulpa one person can create. So the egregore is a kind of entity that arises out of a group and their activity and their aims and all that kind of stuff. And so just offhand, I said, could we consider Trump a tulpa? Which sounds like some Buddhist saying, Trump a tulpa, but Trump a tulpa. But maybe we could dissolve him, if we thought about it. And I have to say, recently, just the events in the news. I mean, some people sort of emailing me and say, what can we do? You wrote that book, he's back. What can we do now? And they said, what about the meme, the meme wars? And I would say, I would stay away from social media. It's the lower astral now. It's going to get taken over. It is taken over by the klipots, the negative probabilistic spheres that are in the other side. It's taken over from them now. And I think anything we put in there is just going to get sucked into that and absorbed. And, individually on our own, we can all, try to focus on maybe this whole notion of dissolving the tulpa.
You give me a lot to think about, and I think this is going to bleed over to my next question. So you've never played role-playing games, from what I understand, and definitely not Mage the Ascension, and that's just fine. It gives you a fresh take. But for those new to it, and including you, Mage is set in a world of darkness where modern Earth is secretly shaped by supernatural forces. In the game, players awaken as mages, and they tap into gnosis to change matter, bend time, and reshape reality. They're basically your wizards and sorcerers on steroids. What I'd love to share is how your view of Magick can inspire players, or maybe even serve as a cool plot twist in the game. And I think you've already done that, but here's another bite of
the apple. The way you just described it reminds me of this 90s film, Dark City.
Oh yeah,
it's a great film because it predates The Matrix, but it's sort of the same theme. And there's cooler aliens, and nobody's got like dark glasses and leather jackets and lots of guns. Which I always thought about The Matrix. If you could do anything, with your mind, why did you do that? Why do you have to have? Because it looks cool. That's why it looks good in cinema.
I like Dark City,
jackets. Dark City, it's a similar thing. There's the aliens. Kiefer Sutherland's in it, but everyone's life is like changed overnight. The reality is completely malleable. When you go to sleep, a postman, and you wake up, you're a secretary, or a different whatever. But one guy, wakes up out of it, and but it's a very positive film because it's more hermetic than Gnostic in the sense that he develops all those powers. No, and he's the one who suddenly it's like he's I forget the actor's name, but he's suddenly the whole idea that reality is malleable that we've been talking about, and like it sounds like that's what the essence of the game is as well. Because you discover you can do that, so he discovers he can do that, and suddenly he can transform the universe around him and all that. So it's a very positive kind of notion of that, rather than in some way. I mean, it leads me to the philosophical question: if you had these powers, what would you do with them?
Exactly.
But what would you do with them? I mean, we know all the superhero stories about but sadly, life isn't exactly like that. Or maybe you could try and do a little superhero stuff every now and then, and maybe try not to get noticed, or you help somebody, or you do, you maybe just do something like that. The sort of the what do you want to call it? The involuntary superhero, or the whatever, the incognito one. So, but I think that's the philosophical quote. What would you do if you had those powers? And it raises lots of questions that maybe beyond the philosophical scope of the game. I don't know, but because how do you know an action that might strike you as, yes, this would be a good thing to do? My power might not have some other consequence. So I think in one way, it's good that we don't have these magical powers all the time, because all of our stray, vagrant thoughts could suddenly start, to materialize. Do you remember that old sci-fi film Forbidden Planet from the 1950s?
I don't think I've watched it in a couple decades. So
okay, the Walter Pidgeon is the scientist on this planet, and he's been living there alone with his daughter for ages and ages and ages, and he's been studying the remains of this ancient civilization, and he's discovered this kind of machine that increases his mind power, and when a sort of spaceship lands on a kind of sort of routine stop to see how things are going, he wants them to get away because he doesn't want them to stay there, because this monster has appeared. This invisible monster has been coming and destroying everything, but it's from his own mind. He doesn't understand it. And in the film is a great line when he realizes what's finally happening. He said, "Monsters from the id, monsters from the id." So the machine that's increased his conscious IQ, has also increased his subconscious, but he didn't know this, and it's manifesting out in the world out there as this invisible monster. And so this is all a parable to say, in many ways, it's good that we don't have these kinds of powers immediately, and unless we have the discipline that goes with them, and this is the part of all the spiritual training that goes into, in so many of the traditions, yes, these powers may appear as you develop yourself spiritually, but in some ways they're not consequential. They're not what's really important. So I don't know. I'm giving you a bit of a sermon here on kind of the responsibility as Spider-Man. The great power comes great responsibility. It's true.
I think it's great, and I actually have been meaning to revisit Dark City because synchronicity. It's come up in multiple conversations earlier this week, and Forbidden Planet I have not watched it in decades, so I'm going to revisit that. So before we wrap things up, I know you've always got some project or other in the works. Is there anything we should know about? Any public appearances or books or whatnot?
I've got some things coming up, both live events and in online, and I have a blog, so you can find about them there. But in terms of books, at the end of the year, if all goes well, I have a new book coming out, and it's a memoir, and it's about how I went from playing in rock bands to doing what I've been doing now for almost 30 years, writing these sorts of books. And I wrote it. I wrote it throughout from January 2023, January 2024, just because people have asked me, at talks and things. So, how did you go from playing to doing this kind of thing? So well, how did I? So I just sort of sat and did it, and then by the end I said, oh God, I've written this. So I sent it off to one of my publishers, and then so we've been working on a photo insert now. So. Touched by the Presence, that's the title, which is an allusion to the song I mentioned earlier.
Great. All right. So if people want to read the book or read your other books or follow your blog, where's the best place to find you online?
It's just my blog, just Lachman.com, and you'll find that. And I'm also on what is it, X these days, though I wouldn't go there if I were you.
No.
It's the dark swamp now. Facebook and Blue Sky. I've got a spot on Blue Sky as well, which is the nice one so far. So
all right. Well, I'll include that in the show notes. Gary, I sure do appreciate you spending time with us today and sharing your thoughts on magic and the occult.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me on. Take care.
Right.
And that's a wrap on today's journey into the strange, the magical, and the deeply real. A huge thank you to Gary Lachman for joining us, musician, historian, occultist, and one of the sharpest minds working in the esoteric field today. From punk rock stages to metaphysical revelations, this conversation truly spanned worlds. If you've got questions, feedback, or just want to share your thoughts on the show, drop us a line at magethepodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to Mage the Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, or wherever else podcasts lurk. If you like today's show, chances are someone else will too. So leave us a review. It helps new listeners find us, and it means the world to the team. We're also out there on Blue Sky, Mastodon, and Threads. All the links are in the show notes at magethepodcast.com, where you'll also find past episodes and deep dive show notes. And yes, we have a YouTube channel. Just search Mage the Podcast or follow the link in the notes. Want to talk about this episode with fellow mages? Join our Discord. Our chantry's always open. The link is right there in the show notes as well. And now, with deep gratitude, we thank our executive producers and patrons. You know who you are. You're the ones keeping the paradox at bay and the signal strong. Special thanks to our oracles, archmasters, and everyone in our community who makes this possible. They are, get ready, Oracle Derek Semsick, Oracle Jason Vines, Oracle Dron Cap, Oracle Ben Bandolo, Oracle Sean Gallagher, Oracle The Crew of Erebus, Oracle Puka G, Oracle Christopher Phillips, Oracle Guy Stewart, and Oracle Buck Gregory, and Oracle Bad Company, and Oracle Spartacus. We'd also like to thank Archmaster Andrew Edelstein, Archmaster Birdo, Archmaster Brad O' the Blue, Archmaster Dan Sevenson, Archmaster Jeff Law. Am I saying that right? Jeff Voice? Jeff Law? Let me know. Archmaster Leroy Boyce, Archmaster Morgan Aaron, Archmaster Simon Strand, and Archmaster Wolf Larison. We'd also like to thank Drunk Des, Jade Barrett, Maurice Hopkins, James B., Jervis Johnson, EBG, George Lara, Will Vincent, Chartan, Kevin Fitzpatrick, Lauren Jensen, Rebecca Pohl, Tyler Bryan, Jason Duncan, Seb Nessus, Bubba, The Pale One, Henry Kraft, Eric Schwenke, Starfish, Ambi Version, Ryan Stray, Lols and Stuff, and Catherine Halperin. But I'm not done yet. I also want to thank Kelric, Alexia, Patrick McNamara, Blaze Hebert, Daniel Scribner, Ricardo, Rob H., Ryan, Alex, Nikita Klemenov, Leslie Weatherstone, Matthew Prohl, Andres S., Bryce Perry, Michael Parker, Jeremy Z., Melissa Krause, Ian Roberts, Curtis Hendricks, that's Real Nito, and that's his real handle, Sig, Manel Canos, and Darren Hennessy. And now we're going to bring it into the home stretch. Eli Helevinger, David Rowe, Jason Kennedy, Samuel Tobin, Nabiru, Jenna F., Chris Kinner, Gray Trillig H., Daniel Cuppin, Ryan Kennedy, Ia Bull, and Stephen Carton. I think I need an energy drink after all that. If you want to become an executive producer and join our Council of the Awakened, helping shape the future of the show, the portal awaits. Just follow the link in the show notes.
Thank everyone for listening. Till next time, truth until paradox, baby.